The drive into Asheville felt longer than Ben expected. Miles of empty fields, sagging farmhouses, and dense clusters of trees made the town seem cut off from the rest of the world, like a forgotten relic from another era. Perfect, he thought. Exactly the kind of place people want to see when they flip through my portfolio. Ben pulled his old hatchback into the only gas station for miles, a rundown shack with a flickering neon sign that buzzed in the evening air. He stepped out, stretching his legs, and surveyed his surroundings. The town's main street was little more than a handful of shops that looked like they hadn't seen new paint in a decade. His breath clouded in the cool air. Late autumn was settling in, bringing with it an early dusk and a chill that clung to the bones. "Going out to the hollow, are ya?" an old voice drawled. Ben turned to see an elderly man sitting outside the gas station, bundled in a thick coat. His eyes were half hidden beneath a worn baseball cap, but his weathered face was set in a frown. The gas station attendant, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20, stood behind the counter inside, watching them from the window. "I guess so," Ben replied, forcing a friendly smile. "I'm a photographer. Heard it's got some of the best scenery around." The old man's frown deepened. "Ain't nothing out there but trees and bad memories." Ben chuckled, unsure whether the man was joking or serious. "Yeah, well, I'm hoping to find a few good shots. I read something about the history of Asheville and its famous hollow. Thought I'd check it out." The man spat on the ground, his voice gruff. "I reckon you'll find more'n you're looking for." There was a long pause. Ben shifted on his feet, the weight of the camera bag hanging awkwardly over his shoulder. The man's eyes stayed on him, unnerving and intense. "Good luck," the man finally muttered, turning his gaze toward the trees in the distance. "You're gonna need it." Ben forced a laugh and headed into the store to pay for his gas. The young attendant didn't say a word. She just handed him his change, her eyes wide and silent, as though she'd overheard the entire conversation but was too afraid to contribute. She barely moved, like a rabbit frozen in place when it senses a predator nearby. Ben left the station quickly and pulled the car back onto the winding road leading deeper into the town. Asheville was barely more than a handful of homes nestled among the trees. The hollow loomed just beyond, a vast expanse of untouched forest that had somehow avoided development for centuries. There were no real tourist maps for it, only vague directions passed around on local blogs and word of mouth. Perfect for what Ben had in mind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben finally reached the trailhead. A faded wooden sign read, "The Hollow," in weathered letters, the paint peeling away. It seemed like the town had stopped caring about the forest long ago. There were no brochures, no carefully marked paths, just a dirt trail that cut through the trees, swallowed by the shadow of the woods. The light was dim now, the sky bruising into shades of deep purple and orange. Ben slung his camera around his neck and set off into the forest, excitement buzzing in his chest. The hollow was dense but beautiful. The towering trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, created a canopy that turned the light into something ethereal. Every now and then the wind whistled through the leaves, carrying with it a faint whisper. Ben snapped pictures as he walked, focusing on the twisted trees, the patterns in the leaves, the way the light shifted through the forest floor. He lost himself in the work, moving deeper into the woods as the trail narrowed and the silence deepened. That was when he saw the first carving. It was subtle at first, just a faint outline on the bark of a massive oak, as though someone had taken a knife and gently scraped away the surface. He squinted, stepping closer. It was a face. Not a simple doodle, but a detailed, intricate carving of a human face, its eyes wide and staring, mouth open as if mid-scream. A shiver crawled up Ben's spine. The face was eerily lifelike, yet there was something off about it. The proportions were slightly skewed, the expression too intense, like it had been captured in a moment of pure fear. He reached out to touch it, but stopped short. The bark was ice cold under his fingers, even colder than the surrounding air. Pulling back, he took a few shots of the carving, documenting its strange presence in the otherwise untouched forest. He figured it was some kind of folk art, a relic left by a wandering artist or a bored local. Still, something about it nagged at him, tugging at the back of his mind. As he moved deeper into the hollow, he found more carvings. Each one was different, some large, others small, all of them grotesquely detailed. Some were human, others seemed distorted, as if they had started as human faces but twisted into something monstrous, their features warped and exaggerated. The air grew even colder, heavier, the light quickly draining from the sky. Ben's breath fogged in front of him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the faces were watching him. He turned on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness, illuminating more of the strange carvings. It was then that he heard it. A faint rustling sound, like someone, or something, moving through the underbrush. Ben froze, shining his flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam flickered for a second, then steadied, revealing nothing but trees and leaves. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that the forest was full of wildlife. It was probably just a deer or a fox scurrying through the woods, nothing to be afraid of. But as he turned to continue down the path, he saw another carving on the tree in front of him, this one larger than the rest. It was a face, and this time it looked disturbingly familiar. It was his own. The lines of his jaw, the curve of his nose, the sharpness of his cheekbones, it was unmistakable. The detail was perfect, down to the faint scar he had on his forehead from a childhood accident. His own eyes stared back at him from the tree, wide and terrified. A cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. "Impossible," he whispered, stepping closer. But the moment he reached out, the carving shifted. The wood around the face seemed to ripple like liquid before solidifying again. His reflection in the bark twisted, the features distorting into something unnatural. His eyes bulged, the mouth stretching wide in a silent scream. Ben stumbled backward, nearly dropping his camera. The air around him felt thick, oppressive, like the forest itself was pressing in on him, trapping him. The rustling sound returned, louder now, and this time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind him. Ben spun around, his flashlight trembling in his hand. In the beam's path, he saw movement. Dark, shadowy figures flitting between the trees, too fast and too indistinct to make out clearly. His heart pounded in his chest. "Run!" his mind screamed, but his legs refused to move. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, like the wind through the leaves, but they grew louder, more insistent. The words were unintelligible, a chorus of voices that seemed to echo from the very trees themselves. Ben's breath came in ragged gasps as he backed away, trying to distance himself from the noise, but the whispers followed him, relentless. He turned and ran, his footsteps loud and frantic in the dead silence of the forest. The trail blurred beneath him as he sprinted through the dark, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The whispers grew louder, sharper, and the faces on the trees seemed to twist and writhe as he passed them, their expressions of horror growing more pronounced. His legs burned, they ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Just as his strength began to wane, the trail opened up, and he burst into a clearing, gasping for air. The whispers faded into the background, and the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to lift, just a little. In the center of the clearing stood a small, dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls sagging and covered in moss. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney, the only sign of life. Ben hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to flee the hollow and never return. But his curiosity, His need for answers overpowered his fear. He approached the cabin, his footsteps soft on the damp earth. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the fire crackling in the hearth. An old man sat in a worn chair, his eyes hollow, his skin pale and tight over his bones. He looked up as Ben entered, his gaze cold and knowing. "You've seen 'em, haven't you?" the old man rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "The tree folk." Ben swallowed hard, his throat dry. What are they?" The old man let out a long, wheezing sigh. "They're us. Or rather, they were us. This forest, it takes people. Carves them into trees, piece by piece, till there's nothing left but wood and whispers. You've been marked." Ben shook his head, backing away. No, that's not..." "Look at your skin," the old man interrupted, his voice now a low growl. Ben glanced down at his arms, and his heart nearly stopped. Thin lines like cracks in dry wood had begun to spread across his skin, the bark-like texture crawling up his wrists, his fingers stiffening. He could feel it now, the slow tightening, the sensation of being rooted in place. "It's too late for you," the old man said, his voice almost sympathetic. "The hollow always claims what it marks. You're becoming one of them." Ben's vision blurred, the room spinning around him. He could hear the trees outside, the whispers rising again, louder, more demanding. He stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape, but the old man's final words froze him in place. "Once it starts, there's no stopping it. You'll be part of the hollow soon enough, just like the rest of them." Ben ran. He didn't stop running, even as the bark crept up his arms, his legs, turning flesh into wood, his mind clouded by the incessant whispers. By the time he reached the town again, the transformation was nearly complete. No one would ever remember him, just another face carved into the trees, another prisoner of the hollow.